Welcome to Medicamentum Authentica, and I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. And today we have a super fascinating and unique guest who returns for a follow-up discussion, none other than Dolfe Zantinge, who originally was an executive in the telecommunications industry, but kind of got burnt out on the corporate emptiness and decided to set up his own scientific interdisciplinary team, initially to study biophotons, a very new area in biological research, but this led him to major discoveries in water and to invent the analemma water wand, of which I'm a big fan. So welcome again, Dolfe.
Andrew, thank you. And
And we were, oh, go
it is
ahead.
a pleasure to be. It is a pleasure to be back again.
Fantastic. So, Dolfe, we were just starting to talk about some new research that you have done because, you, of course, as we all are, concerned about this new infrastructure of 5G and the risk of severe adverse health effects, on not just humans, but really all of the biological systems and the ecology of the planet. And it sounds like that you have found that there might be some effect on carbon dioxide and oxygen from this new infrastructure. And you specifically mentioned the Starlink program, which was kind of quietly launched, where we have tens of thousands of satellites, supposedly part of the 5G network, the Internet of Things. So why don't you fill us in on what are the concerns that you have, and then how the analemma water wand can help mitigate some of these toxicities.
Andrew, I am try to tell you first of all the feedback upon what we received from our laboratory over the last few months and last weeks especially. But let me first go back and tell the people a little bit about what does it mean, microbiome, and why is it suddenly so important? You are a medical doctor, and when you went to university, probably you heard that there are only just a few bacteria in your intestine, and that's it, and they play no role.
Well, Dolph, you may not know, I'm actually a proponent of terrain theory, and I have in recent years studied pleomorphism and the saprophytic role of microorganisms, so I don't share the same perspective that they teach in medical school.
No, I understand. No, but I speak in general. I speak in general.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely correct.
And over the last 10 years, people, due to the fact that they can now measure DNA more easily due to the power of the computer systems, they found out that into the intestine, you might find between 800 to 1200 different types of bacteria. And they even do know that the nervus vagus, one of the major nerve centers, is directly connected from the brain to the intestine.
Right, and they've even found sequences of bacterial genes in nerve cells in the brain, right, to sort
Absolutely.
of confirm that connection that these are part of our body.
Absolutely. And what we do see now is that some doctors already call your intestine the second brain, due to the fact that there is a direct connection between the two. So all those bacteria into your intestine, they play a major role with the development of your vitamins, your enzymes, etc., and they have a direct impact upon your brain system. Those bacteria, they play also a role with our personal DNA. They're very close connected with it. Well, your whole body is surrounded with all those bacteria. And a great part of your DNA is connected to those different types of bacteria. People are extremely sensitive, and they can get very, very sick, and they can mention all types of diseases, from heart diseases to cancers to all kinds of other types of diseases, if you are lacking certain type of these bacteria. And what we do see now is that certain bacteria, they respond in a very negative way to many of the telco waves that we bring now into the world. And they create a complete disbalance. And what we do see as well is that if you bring those waves, if you beam them into water, then also the water is getting affected. So we have done in Europe now several tests. And what we see is that after a few days, the bacteria into the water that normally are in balance are getting out of balance. And this has a huge effect upon every water that we have in the world. So the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, etc., etc. And you can imagine that if we are going to bring in 40 to 50,000 satellites all over the world, and we beam 7 days a week, 24 hours, 5G all over the world, that it can have an effect upon our food supply. Because farmers use the rivers, they have wells, and all this water will be affected in one way or another. So if the bacteria into the soil, because the soil is for us very important, because a lot of the bacteria that are in the soil are the same bacteria that you have in your intestine. And your intestine must get the right food and the right bacteria so that it can support your health system. If we are going to destroy all those bacteria, and that is what we did already with the toxins in the agriculture, but if on top of that, if we also going to beam the 5G on top of that, on a level that we have never seen before, then we have a very, very big problem. And can you imagine if we have those satellites and they beam through the clouds, and then the water into the clouds, when it has to develop rain, is getting affected, then we haven't got a clue what we're going to do. But I would not be surprised if we get a lot of completely new diseases. And we have seen the effect what a disease can bring into the world.
That's right. So, just to put this a little bit in perspective, I think we can, look at the ecosystem of the forest or of the soil as kind of a model for the ecosystem of our body, right? Where we have this system that has certain environmental conditions, right? Temperature, humidity, various composition of the air, the soil, the water, etc. And all of those elements come together to support the functions of life. And when we have those environmental conditions are optimal, right? They're clean, free from toxicity, free from extraneous stimuli that will put imbalance in the system, then everything functions fantastically, right? Like it's meant to naturally. But when we introduce an unnatural element, and especially with, the properties of the EMF signal of 5G are very different from what we've been exposed to before, even though we've seen consequences in the health of people related to those technologies in the past. But this being microwave or millimeter wavelength has unique ability to penetrate into substance, right, into bodies of water, etc. So if we conceptualize our body working as primarily water being in the perfect crystalline gel-like structured state to bring about all of the chemistry, all of the electricity and magnetism, and those physical aspects of our functioning are working well. And when the outside influence of this millimeter radiation hits this perfect water in the biological system, in the ecological system, in the forest, the soil, in our body, it disturbs the crystalline structure of the water and sort of poisons it. And then it can't function in the optimal way. And that imbalance sets off a change, right? And that change includes being directly toxic, so perhaps killing some of these microorganisms directly, and then also shifting the pleomorphic cycle of the microorganisms now to respond to an urgent state of toxemia, right? And not a chemical toxin, but a electromagnetic toxin. And of course, those changes will result in symptoms that will be uncomfortable. It's the body's trying to correct itself, trying to restore balance, the same thing that we would see in the ecosystems. But if we still have this insult constantly beaming, right, then it's much, much more difficult to overcome. If we look back at like Furstenberg's work about, what happened when the electrical grid or the satellite installations, the previous kind of telecommunications infrastructure, we see this pattern that looks like there is disease that's created, and then there's a period of adaptation, and then there's maybe a change in the physiology. Maybe even our physiology is really not the same as it was, pre-industrial revolution or telecommunications age. And so, but we, of course, can't predict if, how that adaptation may come about in the future. What is the degree of devastation or of illness that we might see? And, like you pointed out, a very interesting thing, that this is not something that we would just look at as affecting us as humans, right, who are primarily using this technology, but because of the way the infrastructure is, that they have to, cover everything because they want it to be the Internet of everything, right? They want every being in the forest, or sorry, every being in the field to, be connected to that network. So, as soon as it's picked, it's tracked in this database, right, all the way until it gets into your belly, kind of system. So that means that all of nature, essentially what you're saying, is going to be exposed to this. And it could have effects in the entire system, right, at every step, every organism, every substance involved in biology.
Absolutely. What you say is completely correct. And it also shows that in relation to the latest research that we have done in the microbiome, that we are lacking now the knowledge upon the effects. We even do have no research at all done in that specific area. The telco is only looking to, is your mobile phone heating up your head to a certain degree? But this has nothing to do with it, because what we are lacking in our knowledge is that nature, the very subtle nature that creates all those bacteria, fungi, and all those living organisms, they live upon very specific low frequencies, electromagnetic waves.
The Schumann
And
resonance, right?
yes, all of them. And we are disturbing all those waves. And that is the problem. So what we also forget is that we have a big CO2 problem in the world. Everybody talks about it. But CO2 doesn't come back into the soil, into the oceans, if you don't do anything about it. It belongs into the soil. When a plant must grow, it needs CO2. And the oceans can also collect CO2. But what's happening, we are killing this whole internal environment into the soil, and then it cannot absorb the CO2 anymore. So what we did in a test with our NLMR water, and that was the first test in the world whereby we did it, but we want to continue this testing, hopefully in the US next year, is that we compared rainwater and they put it on polluted soil. The soil was under the attack of toxins for more than 10 years. And we used rainwater and we used the NLMR stick, and then we compared the two waters. So the same rainwater, but we used the NLMR stick. And what we see now is that after 2 months, there was an increase of the bacteria, a significant increase of the bacteria, and the original bacteria came back. So that was really a big surprise.
Now, are these photosynthetic bacteria?
Part of it, but also bacteria that normally belong into the soil.
Right.
And there was a huge diversity popping up.
So do you think the water wand changed the solubility of CO2 in the water?
What we start to believe as an hypothesis is that we believe that the wand that you just talked about is making a connection with the light. And the light is an electromagnetic wave as well. And in one way or another, that has an ability to communicate with biological systems in the most perfect way. And it does it into the soil, but also into the human body. So it optimizes the communication with normal harmonic electromagnetic waves. And then Mother Nature takes over control again. I would almost say, thank God for that. And then you see that things come back in a normal harmony. And this was really a very impressive test because we saw that the CO2 was for 60% more coming back than compared with the rainwater. And not only that, bacteria came back. We saw an increase of 100% in the biophotons in the vegetables. And all that together shows that water has a huge effect. So the crystalline form, as you just discussed, Andrew, is really playing a major role. And it is time that we, as doctors and biologists, are going to look to the subtle energies and see how they communicate with each other. And for me, the highway of communication is water.
Well, it totally makes sense. And, one thing that I have a movie coming out called Terrain, and we feature the work of Veda Austin, who you may remember also spoke at the True Healing Conference, right? And her work is actually very closely related to what you're talking about because her recent work has been shown that water can create what she calls hydroglyphs, where that she would, communicate a word or an idea to the water and then, freeze it, and it would display a specific image or a glyph that corresponds to that word or that meaning. And this has been repeated many, many times, even by different operators, right? So what you're kind of saying is that when you have water of a proper quality and state, right, like that you can improve rainwater by stirring it with the analemma wand, and we'll explain exactly what that is for people who may not know, that now the water regains its ability to provide that language or communication. And of course, it's not going to be the same language that it would communicate with us as humans, with a pictograph, right? But it's going to be in a way that the plants can understand it. And what you detected in the soil with low CO2 levels, right, is a disruption in the carbon cycle where we have, CO2 is an exhaust gas from our own breathing. It may come from burning fossil fuels. It comes from volcanoes and other, of course, animals breathing out, et cetera, et cetera. And then where does it go? So it's balanced between the air. It's sequestered in the plants and the soil, and then in all of the water, and like in the ocean. And there's different solubility in the water. It actually is more soluble at colder temperatures. And the plants, of course, it's their carbon source, it's their food source. So we know that if there's impaired CO2 in the soil, that it indicates the plants are not actually functioning properly, right? And then we can, if we restore what you're hypothesizing is the communication between, that the water provides between the environmental conditions, the sun, the light, right, and the plants itself, was able to help restore this functioning.
Yes, absolutely. That's very important. And one of the things that came out of our recent test is again that we still lack also knowledge upon the other elements. We don't understand how the air is really communicating with the soil and with the sun and with light. All those things we only think in terms of a chemical world.
Right.
But there is a subtle world with energies, and they have a communication. And they have vibrations. And those vibrations, those frequencies, they play a huge role in nature. And the only thing we do now is that we kill in all kinds of forms the communication. We kill now, if we don't care, we kill now the atmosphere. We are killing the soil and we're killing the water. And we do it fantastic. But I think we have a limited time to bring it back. And I think in the coming years, we really have to get a clear understanding of what it does to us and how important this whole communication is. And that we have to get rid of only looking to the world as a chemical substance. There is much, much more. Yes.
Absolutely. And, this is why it's so important for me to find, people like you who are doing this work because, we have adopted the materialist philosophy in our mainstream scientific establishment, right? Which essentially says there's only chemicals, right? I mean, the biology that I learned in university and medical school says that all properties arise from the material. The material is the only thing. And of course, we have much empirical scientific evidence that contradicts that directly, and it's just kind of tossed aside or said, oh, that's just an anomaly. And so as a result of that, there's very, very limited research looking into these aspects. But just a glimmer of what we see, right? We see that, first of all, how important water is. We see how these things are affected by subtle energies. We see the effect of sound. Recently we had a webinar with John Stewart Reed, and he described this study where he took blood from the blood bank, right, which is essentially rotting blood cells. And when you look at them in this assay, you could see that only a portion of them are still alive after, being stored in the refrigerator for a month or two. Just by exposing them to sound, and by the way, this effect was amplified when the sound was beautiful singing, a huge portion of those red blood cells that were half dead came back to life and full functioning. Right? Now, this is something that we have, no explanation for in the mainstream, and they would say that it was a ridiculous thing or that it was just, oh, this one circumstance, it was one in a million, that kind of thing. But we have here, right, if it came from a human who was singing in a beautiful way, it had a more pronounced effect, right, than a machine-generated tone from a speaker. And that has to be, related to what you're talking about, that there are subtle variables, right, that we don't fully understand. We could describe them as energy, but it's a signal, it's information that is being permeated, right? Maybe it's perpetuating a signal that comes, from outside of us. Maybe it comes from within. But this is there's so much to discover when we look at these aspects.
Yeah, I'm pleased that you brought this up. I had a similar situation in India a few years ago. There was a big agriculture field with poor farmers, and they were really having a lot of problems with their harvest. And what they started to do, they started to sing to the seeds every year for a week before harvest. And what they noticed, and they did it together with a local university around New Delhi, they noticed that those seeds that really that they use for singing were growing much better after year 2. And after that, all the farmers started to sing. It was beautiful. But the harvest was really fantastic. They had 30% more harvest.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible.
So it's a little bit in line with what you just said.
This can kind of redefine being a singer for your career. You could be a seed singer,
Yeah, no, we were really surprised.
a
And
crop
the
crooner.
reason, yeah, the reason that they invited us is that they wanted to find out, can we measure it with biophotons? And because we could measure the light into the seeds. And for us, this was really interesting. And we really could see that there is a difference.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So, just for anyone who's not familiar with biophotons, actually, biological organisms, including seeds and including humans, actually emit light. And it's very difficult to detect by conventional methods, but Dolph was fortunate enough to develop or sort of, like build onto a system to detect these things, and found that they are a sign of vitality and good health, and that when there's a broader spectrum of biophotons and a larger number of biophotons, that those are indicators of vitality. Is
Yeah,
that accurate, Dolph?
yeah, yeah, that's absolutely correct. You can measure biophotons with extremely sensitive cameras, and normally you measure the flickering of a candlelight on 20-mile difference, and then you measure the light of that candle. That is how sensitive you measure it.
Wow. So it's the equivalent of measuring a candle's light 20 miles away?
Yeah,
Wow. That's pretty impressive. So
yeah,
I
and
guess we didn't
they
have
collect it.
technology like that for very long, probably.
You collect the data and then you compare the data when it is healthy, but that is how sensitive the cameras are. Yes. And those light forms, they became a language of vitality, and that is why for us subtle energy became so important. Because you can see that the real life form is structured with that subtle energy, and it communicates with that subtle energy. And we could also see, and that is very interesting, Andrew, that if you put multiple seeds and you connect them to each other, that they talk to each other with light as well.
Wow.
Yes.
So how does that, you saying like that, if one increases their, biophoton output, that the neighboring ones mirror that behavior?
Yeah. And you could also see that if you put them in a certain form, then you can see that the form also emits different light structures. And if you then take out the seed, then you can see that they restructure themselves, and then you get a new communication.
Wow. So could this be a way that humans also communicate subtle things to each other, like the way that, for example, women may synchronize their menstrual periods or other
I would
things
not be
like that?
surprised. Yes, I would not be surprised at all. That is the case. So for us, the subtle energy became much more important than the chemical energy forms that we see. Because what I didn't expect at all, but it was for me really surprised that when it is spring and you put all the seeds into the soil, there is a whole orchestra working under your feet. And the beauty is that what we saw is that if you have this analemma water, then you get a fantastic piece of music, because we could see that the light was flickering in all kinds of forms. So it had a huge effect and that has to do with water. Water is the communicator between them. It's the highway. So the seeds could sing their song.
So that's amazing. So you saying that the biophoton signal is propagated through water?
Yeah, we could measure it into the seeds. If you bring in different types of water, then you get different types of biophotons. Yes.
Wow, quite amazing. And so is this something that if we have a backyard garden, that it will make a big difference if we stir the water that we give to the plants?
I can definitely recommend it to you, because what we forget is that we also eat that light in our vegetables. We were starting this discussion with the importance of our intestine. And if you want to stay a healthy person, you need the right bacteria and fungi in balance into your intestine. Then you are much, much more resistant against all kinds of diseases. And what we have seen is that if you really give this water to the right vegetables, then it builds up that resistance.
So even the vegetables are more resistant to poor environmental conditions or exposure to toxins or even electromagnetic frequencies.
Absolutely. What we have discussed this morning with our team of researchers is that we even saw that if we gave plants the normal fertilizer, the normal amount of fertilizer, that the plants without fertilizer did emit more light. So the water is so critical because in one way or another, we block constantly in nature all kinds of, then we put in fertilizers and
Right.
chemicals. Makes no sense. You must bring it in harmony. That's a completely different story.
Well, the only fertilizer I would put on my garden is manure.
Yeah, yeah. But that's the normal one. That's the
Yes,
normal.
absolutely.
But that depends. For instance, take the manure of a cow, for instance. If the cow is constantly eating artificial vegetables or have been manipulated, then you get also a different effect on the soil as well.
Absolutely. Right. So what you need really is like your own kind of ecosystem, right? Where you have the animals that are eating the same thing that you're eating, right? That you're growing, and then their dung is fertilizing it, and you have this really nice balance that you
Yes.
keep the whole system clean. And like someone like Joel Salatin, I don't know if you're familiar with him in the United States, he's really established that type of a farming system and that type of balance on his land. So it is definitely possible, but it's always just follows the same adage of scientific experiments, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Yes,
So
that's it.
so keep the garbage out completely and have a self-contained clean system.
Yeah. And the reason that we really want to do the research on this is that we think that we have to bring back Mother Nature as soon as possible in harmony. But what we do see now is that the guys who run the chemical world, they are going to bring in all kinds of chemicals. And I even saw one of the latest reports against CO2 that they want to build a whole shield in the air with mirrors that the sun doesn't come through anymore. And I thought, what are we doing? The sun is our communicator that brings in our information system. So I don't know what's happening in the mind of some scientists, but it is time that we go back to nature, I think.
I completely agree. And, in my personal life, I'm headed that way myself, moving, back to the land and getting my hands dirty, out of the concrete jungle,
Yeah,
because that's where we belong. We are part of nature actually, and maybe we've lost touch with that to some degree because of all of the virtual technology, that people, I mean, even we're using right now, I mean, we're far away from each other, right? But even if I wanted to go interview you in person, I couldn't
that's
right now,
true.
right? But so we can utilize this for, because we're doing this excellent collaboration and educating people. But, we have to spend most of our time going back into the natural world and doing the kind of things that we're meant to do as men and women.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we also see is that there is a constant increase in the world also on allergies, and that also has to do with the way we eat and the way we behave and the way we use all kinds of liquors. And everything now affects us. And on all those areas, we see that water is again one of those areas that plays a major role to come back to a normal harmonic system. Yes.
Absolutely. And, in my days of doing consultations, in natural healing and learning about people's health issues, I'll tell you that one of the largest problems that we have, and it seems to be, almost universal, is that we don't even take enough water into our body. We people drink all these other substances that really are diuretics, right? Anything with caffeine, with a lot of sugar, right? They're with alcohol are all gonna make your body lose more water. And of course, some of those poisons are going to they're going to poison the water, right? Like alcohol, for
Yeah.
example. So, this is something that even right now we can learn about and we can make a very quick improvement in our life if we just improve the quality of the water we drink and drink a sufficient amount of water, right? But of course, these things are going to be, become much more important, as more of these assaults on our health keep coming, aimed at us.
Yeah, absolutely. And for that reason, we also invented this wand that can be used by every member in the household. And we thought that we need something that can rearrange the structure into water in just a few seconds. And that is now doable. But now we also want to do it on a larger scale in the agriculture and maybe even try to cleanse rivers and lakes.
Wow, that sounds quite ambitious. So if you want, if you wouldn't mind to just kind of give a brief description of exactly what the water wand is and how you create it, but we know that with just about 20 seconds or 30 seconds of stirring, that you transform the starting water, and hopefully it's pure to begin with, into coherent, structured water.
Yes. First of all, let me explain what coherent water means. Coherent water means that the atomic structure into the water has the ability to create different crystalline forms and can transform and transport the information that normally should be in water. People don't think that water can transport information, but that isn't true. That has been proven now multiple times. You can create certain forms into the water, and when you have that forms, then you have an effect upon the biological system. Most waters nowadays are losing that communication system. So you have water, but you have to drink much more water because you are losing the communication. Yes. So what we try to do now is to create a system, and that is what we call the wand. And in that wand, there is original water. And to make that water, it takes a year because you have to go through all the cycles of the year and you have to know how to bring it back into the atomic structure. That wand has that water in it and it looks like glass. And then you can stir it into water. But what is happening is that due to the incredible power into that wand, it copies that into the glass. So the coherent water is copied into the glass in 20 seconds. So very often we test that, not the water into the wand, but the water into the glass after stirring it with the wand. So all the tests, also the test that we just discussed in the agriculture, is based upon the water that was stirred with this wand. So we use this wand and it remains stable even after weeks, months.
So, Dolph, I just want to interject because are like so many really amazing facets to this device. And, this is why this is kind of the first technology that structures water that I was really interested in, thought was viable. Because, you know, one thing is taking a full year to prepare this original water is just incredible, that any one with a commercial interest would be willing to undertake that process, right? But, it shows your integrity because you discovered that's just how long water takes in nature to go through this process, and that's your goal, is to have that quality of water and not to take shortcuts and increase your profit margin. So, it's just really amazing. And I'd love to be sort of, see exactly what this water goes through. Because I think, I want to go through it for a year possibly. But, then the other thing is, essentially what you have here is really a magic wand, because we've even seen in cartoons, right, where perhaps it's a sorcerer, which is the opposite of this case, because this is the very good kind of magic, but where they take a wand, right, and touch something and then it changes color or changes property. And essentially that is exactly what you're doing, except this is happening, in reality, right? It's scientifically proven process that by a quick stir with this very special water that's encased in a quartz crystal, cylinder, that you can just transform, this water from, a dead substance into a living highway of communication.
Yes, that's it. Because if we have water into a glass, we think it is just water. No, it is a communicator. And if you have the right water, what we call coherent water, then you have the ability that your orchestra that is taking place into that glass of water is playing the right music. And that's what's happening. And how do we prove that? And how have we have proven it over the last 4 or 5 years now, only with external laboratories all over the world, because we set up the protocol, but they did a test and they came up with the reports. And what we have seen now is that every year, year after year, all over the world, it has proven that water has a serious effect on everything that lives. And one of those examples is also that we saw, for instance, that it has an effect on our brains. That is not really a surprise because you, as a medical doctor, know that your brain is full of liquids. And
Absolutely.
so, if water has a certain memory, then you can imagine that it might have an effect upon your brain that also communicates with your memory as well.
Well,
So,
I mean, the since water is the by far, right, the main component of every part of the body. Something like, I think it's 99 out of every 100 molecules is water, right? And in fact, with the brain, I often talk about the dry weight of the brain, but that's only a small portion of the entire system, right? Because
yeah,
really, the water is the medium that all of the life processes take place. So of course, but this connection specifically about the memory and the information and the language, right? Because we think of our brain as being the center of those things. We can even talk about, Broca's area and Wernicke's area of language and all and such. So it is important to make this connection, right? That this is affecting possibly, our thinking, our memory, our understanding, our cognitive abilities, and perhaps in subtle ways that we may not be aware of at first, but that, I know, and I never heard this when I first started my career in the mid 90s in medicine, but I began hearing in the last 5 to 10 years, people just like, it's almost like a pandemic of brain fog, right? That everybody's experiencing this. And so now could this, be a connection? It's definitely something to strongly consider.
yeah, you should not see the wand as a medicine. It is bringing back Mother Nature as it is.
Absolutely.
But what we do with our food, and especially with all the toxins that we also get every day when we eat those vegetables, step by step, we are building up a toxic layer into our cells, and that blocks the communication. So I'm not surprised that beside all the allergies, you get all kinds of other diseases coming up. And I think people have to understand how their body functions. And it starts with food, water, good health, and exercises. It's very simple, but in one way or another, we haven't gotten it.
That's right. I totally agree, but I would also add that there needs to be a sort of a psycho-spiritual component as well, where you have a healthy outlook and healthy relationships, and that you're always trying to become a better you. And if you
Absolutely.
combine those things with those lifestyle elements you talked about, then there's nothing to stand in the way of health and vitality.
Well, I'm glad that you bring this up, Andrew, because you're absolutely right. Because what you do is that you create also your personal electromagnetic wave constantly by thinking. And what we do know is that water has an effect upon that as well. So what you just said is very, very critical. If you think that you have a healthy body and you are optimistic and you want to be a good person, then that is part of your electromagnetic wave as well. and that has an effect on you. Absolutely.
Well, this is a great area to sort of just introduce German New Medicine, which is, a philosophy essentially, or a science, a medical science that purports that it's really conflict shocks, which are psychological stressors and trauma, that are the root cause of almost all diseases, and that basically your psychological state with respect to resolving these kind of conflicts determines your vulnerability to toxic insults, whether it be from 5G or from, pharmaceuticals or whatever. And so it probably is the mechanism that we're talking about here, right? That when you have a conflict, or if you have the fear response, that it creates a certain type of energy and resonance that diminishes certain functioning, creates more toxic metabolites, right, and ends up, inhibiting the water's ability to be in that optimal crystalline structure. So we need to address those things as part of the equation in order to kind of reverse that, or not be, self-sabotage, be our own worst enemy, things like that. And on the converse too, I've definitely spoken to people who, just through changing their attitude, their beliefs about something, their and processing and healing from trauma, have resolved serious physical ailments, right? Even cancer. So this
Absolutely.
this link is really, really critical, and your research opens up new avenues to understand this better.
Yeah, I even think that certain emotional blockages into your body uh, has a direct effect upon the communication into the body between the cells, and water is that communication layer. So in one way or another, you you create a chaos, internal chaos in your information system. And also there we see that water plays a major role again. And in many philosophies, you see that emotions are also connected to water. And that probably has a reason.
Right,
So
and we can certainly see that in Dr. Emoto's work.
yes, yes. Although one of the things that constantly pops up is that Emoto could not repeat it. He could not repeat his scientific outcomes. But he had a great impact upon a lot of scientists because he could show to the people that there are crystalline forms into water and that each form has a different meaning. And for that, he was extremely helpful. Yes, absolutely true.
Right, and I think, since then a lot of people have been able to replicate many of experiments, but it is interesting that it seems that some people are not able to reproduce the results and other people are, and I think the specific factors of why that is aren't fully understood. But I do know from Veda's work that the water that they're using definitely makes a difference, and probably the psyche and the health of the person giving the information to the water probably makes a difference. But
Absolutely.
so, whether or not anybody can get the exact same results, it definitely, as you point out, demonstrates very novel properties of water that previously, were totally unknown. And I think, any mainstream scientist that simply tosses aside the research because of that reproducibility, would be really foolish. It's interesting in other areas, when they can't reproduce an experiment, it's accepted as being valid, like with, for example, variants of a virus.
Yeah,
Right? That's basically trying to do an experiment but getting different results, and instead of saying they can't reproduce it, right, they have another explanation. So, but this. So what, do you have any plans to look at this area, or do you have any research that speaks to this psychological connection?
absolutely. For us, brain waves are very critical. As a matter of fact, we do some testing now with MRI scans
Mm-hmm.
because we do see that the brain,
Like fMRI, functional MRI?
Yeah, and we are doing that now with the university hospital over here in the Netherlands, and we are doing all kinds of tests, and we beam and radiate different types of frequencies also to the brains, and see how they respond. So this is very critical area because a lot of the diseases we create ourselves. We put it into our head and it becomes part of the mind, and then we create a mess. And that is the problem. So we really want to have a better understanding of this. What we do see with our water, and that is why we have tested it many times now also in the agriculture, is that we don't have the problem of a mind and an ego. So we could see how Mother Nature is solving the problems itself. And that is very interesting to see. So the next step is really how the emotional behavior of the human being is having an effect upon all kinds of diseases in the body, and what type coherent water can play in that. Yes, but I love to keep you informed on that, Andrew.
Yeah, well, that really sounds fantastic, and I can't wait to see some of your preliminary results. So, Dolph, we've been talking for a while, and of course, I know I can definitely keep talking for hours because I'm so fascinated by this stuff. But I want to just take a moment to check in with you because I understand it's been a pretty difficult experience where you are in Holland, and we know there's been lots of turmoil in Europe, although we have seen some reversals of some of the policies, like recently from Boris Johnson in the UK. But what type of difficulty are you experiencing and in the Netherlands right now?
Well, what you see, Andrew, is that mid-December, our government made a decision that we are in a complete lockdown. People can't go to school, university, and the only thing you can do, you can go to a shop. People have to work at home as much as they can. And that situation is taking place now for more than several weeks after already the lockdowns that we had before. What you do see is that a lot of people get completely frustrated. And I think the government underestimate the emotions of a lot of people, especially young people. They really suffer. They can't go to school already for year number 2. And I can also talk about the economical situation for a lot of companies because that is really a disaster. If you look to the hospitals, and I don't want to blame anybody, but if you look to the hospitals, then you see that those who are really infected by COVID and have a serious problem with it, most of those people have already a kind of disease or upcoming disease into their body, or it is the weight is they're too heavy, or they have other problems with sugar into the body, or a liver problem, or a heart problem.
Right.
And
We've
just
seen the same thing in the United States where almost everyone who has a serious flu-like illness, that they would label as COVID, these people have tons of chronic disease. In fact, they're really taking time bombs walking around because their bodies are full of toxins and they had very unhealthy, lives up to now, right? So it's really not different than we see any flu season, but in this case, of course, there's a main agenda that they're pointing to. And I wonder, how many of those people have received the toxic injections? Because, in North America, we're hearing reports that maybe 80% of the serious patients in the hospitals are there really because of vaccine complications.
yeah. Well, what we do see now is that a lot of people, especially with the last virus, the Omicron virus, as we call it here, everybody who has had a vaccine is still sick now.
Right. The opposite,
And
of course, of how it's advertised.
yeah, well, then you hear on television or in the news or in other media forms, yes. But the good news is that the immune system is better than ever before. and they don't have to go to the intensive care that much. Well, I am wondering what the long term will bring us, because I know a lot of people who have not been vaccinated, and when they got COVID, well, after a few days, they are much better. Although after some days, by some people, you see suddenly a certain allergy reaction. And I wonder why we don't treat it in the normal way, but why we suddenly only believe in a vaccine. But okay, that's a completely different story, I think.
Well, yeah, I think we can agree that the government's agenda is not really driven by our individual health needs and interests. So we can leave it at that. But Dolf, please tell us, where can people explore your material? Well, first of all, you can definitely get the True Healing Conference download available at truehealingconference.com, because Dolf did an excellent presentation there. And I also encourage people to see our first interview on all my video channels. But Dolf, tell us where you would send people. And of course, we are going to put a link for the Analemma water wand for people who want to give that a try down below.
Yeah, well, we have an international website called analemmawater.com, and there you can read a lot of the information. In the coming months, we are going to publish more research on this website as well. All the research that we do now over the last few years is done by external organizations. So it is open. We put it on the web. People can go to the website and read all about it, and then they can see also the effects, the positive effects of the Analemma water. So analemmawater.com is the website.
Dolf, I just want to really, pay my respect to you for having independent, research evaluate your product. I mean, this is something that, it's the exact inversion of what's done in the pharmaceutical industry, where they do their own research and then they bury the results for 50 years so that no one sees, how bad or dangerous their products are. So you're really following what would be in a truly, kind of competitive marketplace. Like if we really had free trade, that you would have to have independent agencies, right, do the testing so that it would be free from your commercial interest, right? They just get a fee to do the research, whatever the result is, right? And their business model would be, to develop trust from the public that their testing is neutral and unbiased, right? And so that's why you farm it out like that. And this is just a great mechanism, and it's risky, of course, because if they have unfavorable results, then you're gonna have a poor business outcome. So it's just the degree of integrity that we can put into our business pursuits, right? So we're not trying to exploit people. We're not trying to trick them. We're trying to offer something that we believe and we know really adds value, and we're trying to just be honest with people about that, this is a good product, it provides this, and, we don't take our word for it, right?
That's
Look
it.
at these outside sources, they'll, and they will give you, the neutral scientific information, that supports our mission. And that's how we need to all function.
Did you know that 99% of your molecules are water? That's why the quality of the water you drink determines the quality of your life. Analemma is an architect of water in your body. It creates a liquid crystalline structure in the water you drink. So it creates coherence inside your body and mind. Coherence unleashes the body's own natural rejuvenating power. It revives realigns and regenerates you. Analemma, the architect of life.
Introducing a powerful dietary supplement, over 1 million years in development. A highly concentrated, complex, natural formula, rich in trace minerals as well as fulvic and humic acids. Mother Nature's ancient elixir for energy, revitalization, and long life. Shiljit Mumio means conqueror of mountains, destroyer of weakness. Take in the nutritional wisdom of the ancient past. Unleash the vibrant, healthy being inside. Become